Great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for joining us in Revere and online as well. When I was 12 years old, I had saved $100 in the bank from mowing lawns. And I was so excited to get that first $100. That was a big deal. I'd been working on it for a long time. Remember, this was a time when minimum wage was like $2. So $100 was a lot of money. It was a big deal for me also because we were a very poor family in a very poor area of rural Indiana. And I was saving money at the age of 12 to try to start a concessions business that would help me pay for college, the ability to go to college someday. Then Sunday came. And if you haven't figured this out yet, Sundays has a way of changing things. It did so back then, and it still does for me today. And on that Sunday evening, we had a missionary church planter that came to church that day. And I don't remember what he preached about, and I do not remember what city he was planting a church in. But I do remember this. When he kneeled down to pray, he had holes in the bottom of his shoes. That disturbed me. It hit me really hard because I was a poor kid that also had holes in the bottom of most of my shoes. But I was in better shape than the missionary because I at least had duct tape covering the holes on my shoes. Apparently, planting a church made him so poor he couldn't even afford the duct tape to cover the holes in his shoes. I was praying that day, just a generic prayer at the end of church. It was not heartfelt. I was just going through the motions. And God spoke to me. And I knew it was God because God has been speaking to me since I was very young. He still does. And he said this to me that day. He said, "Kurt, go to the bank and give that man everything you have in your account to help him plant that church." What? I had been working all of my 12 years of my life to save that $100. Now remember, it was also 1982, and the TV show Different Strokes was a big deal back then. And so I said to God, "God, what you talking about, Jesus?" And he said, "Give him everything in your account." I knew that Jesus did that to rich people in the Bible. I didn't know he did it to poor kids from Indiana. So I went to my dad later that night as everyone was leaving church, and I said, "Dad, I think God told me to give the missionary church planter that $100 that I had just saved in my savings account." And he said, "We'll stop by the bank first thing tomorrow morning." He didn't try to talk me out of it. He understood that God was trying to do something in me. And so we got the money the next morning and sent it to the missionary church planter. I hope he got some duct tape for his shoes. Now, there's a lot more to that story that involves immediately afterwards, I got a contract with a real estate company to do landscaping for their properties, which gave me enough money to purchase my future concessions wagon, which helped me to get to college and give me financial and business and entrepreneurial skills needed to eventually be able to start a church in the city of Lynn. But if I had said no on that Sunday, if I had simply ignored the Spirit's leading, if I had placed my own poverty up in front of God like an idol, we wouldn't be here today, and this church wouldn't exist. My goal in this financial series is to give you the ability to say yes to God even when it doesn't make sense. We are in a Faith and Finances series, part 2, and if you weren't here last week, and you were not able to watch it online, you can go to our YouTube channel, East Coast International Church YouTube channel, and you can watch the service from last week and catch up. I know that most of you listening today, whether in person or online, want to be able to give financially to whatever the need is that you see. You want to be generous. You want to be extravagant in your generosity. You want to meet the needs of widows and orphans. You want generosity to be a daily and weekly rhythm in your life. You want to say yes without hesitation when God says, give it all. But there are obstacles. There are obstacles in the way. Some of those obstacles are quite tall. In fact, the Bible calls those obstacles strongholds. And they are not just physical in nature, they are spiritual in nature. And they must be torn down. Last week we identified where our attitude toward money is. Our attitude towards money is either we are surviving or struggling or stable or secure or in surplus. And hopefully this week you are able to identify which one of those you were. We wrestled with how deeply has the lure for things or wealth deceived us. And just trying to have last Sunday a Sunday of financial honesty. And maybe this week, as you've been examining, and I hope you have, maybe you found some cracks or in the certain arenas of your life financially. And if you found some little money idols popping up their heads, if you discovered some financial brokenness in your life, then pay attention to this. Things that God considers as broken, God desires to heal. And we should never be content with any area in our life that is broken. We should contend alongside of God for healing in that area of our life, even if that area happens to be financial brokenness. At the core of what we are doing at East Coast International Church is to make disciples. Tell your neighbor, make disciples. Now, Jesus, in one of his final teachings on earth, spoke to this very issue. So let me set the stage for that teaching. Everything, for thousands of years of human history, all the prophecies, all the stories, the birth of the long-awaited Messiah, the life and ministry and miracles of Jesus, his sacrificial death and resurrection, all lead to this one and final command. In Matthew chapter 28, Jesus says, some of the last words he ever says, I have been given all authority in heaven and earth, therefore go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Jesus says, go make disciples. The idea of making a disciple, a true believer and follower of the way of Jesus, is literally the whole point. It's the whole point. So what is a disciple? Now, while I don't think we can quickly summarize all of what it means to be a true disciple, there are certainly categories or benchmarks that are consistent with growing disciples. And here's five quick benchmarks. The first is grace. You've experienced the grace of God through the forgiveness and leadership of Jesus, and you are helping others to experience that grace. Growth. You are taking personal responsibility to grow spiritually by learning and applying the Scriptures in regular prayer, Scripture learning, and corporate worship. Third is groups. You are in discipleship-oriented community with other believers for care and friendship and spiritual growth and maturity. Gifts. You are discovering and developing your gifts, including your spiritual gifts, and you are using them as God directs and desires. And fifth, good stewardship. You increasingly understand that you are simply a trustee with God's resources to use and increase for His purposes. That includes stewardship of time and talents, but it also includes financial stewardship. Now, since we are in this faith and finance series, we're going to land here on this point. And here's the reason why it's important to talk about this. To be a growing and faithful disciple or follower of Jesus, we must excel in the discipline of good stewardship in our life. And becoming a good steward comes with many challenges. Last week, I gave you all homework and asked you to read Luke chapter 15 with an economic lens. Specifically, the most widely known and celebrated parable that Jesus ever taught, the prodigal son. Today, I want us to look at that prodigal son and the fall and the rise of him. One day, Jesus is out bringing the heat to the people, and he tells the story. Luke chapter 15, verse 11. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed. That part is the most interesting part of the story to me. The father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him. But no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. So he returned home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to the servants, Quick, bring the finest robe in the house, put it on him, get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for the son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. So the party began. Great story. The story continues, and there's much more to it. But today, our assignment is simply to look at this through a different lens. Looking at it through a financial and economic lens, what do we learn in the story when we look at it that way? Well, something that really jumps out to me is this idea of the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. You see, the young man wanted to do his life his own way. He wanted to do it differently. And so he built a lifestyle that was entirely built on pleasing the flesh. And when you have a lifestyle that's built on pleasing yourself, you end up squandering the substance that God gives you. But a life built on self-discipline offers opportunity to live in ongoing abundance. Or, as I say a lot, stability in your life will release ability. In Luke chapter 15, the young man said, I want my share of your estate now, before you die. Somebody say now. Now. So now is the critical word there. Now. The son was so consumed with the now, the immediate, that he couldn't see the future. He wanted immediate gratification. He was consumed with short-term thinking. Just think about it, if the son had simply stayed the course, he would have continued to build wealth with his family, provide good jobs for the community, and live a life of honor and purpose. But that's not what he did. He fell into the trap that so many people in 2022 fall into every single day. Needing that fancy thing, or wanting a particular status, or wanting that particular esteem of other people. Wild living. That could mean a lot of things. When I was a kid, I just thought it meant he went out partying all the time. It might have meant that. It probably did mean that. But it could also mean a lot of other things. Extravagant living. Wildly, wastefully living. When he was with his father, he was a creator. But when he became deceived by the lures of wealth, he became a squanderer. And there's the significant difference. He became a squanderer. And that's what the lust of the flesh does. thinking about this through the lens of what it means to be a good steward, listen to these next words found in 1 John. Do not love this world, nor the things it offers you. For when you love the world, you do not have the love of the Father in you. For the world offers only a craving for physical pleasure, a craving for everything we see, and pride in our achievements and possessions. These are not from the Father, but are from this world. And this world is fading away, along with everything that people crave. But anyone who does what pleases God will live forever. As humans, we are drawn towards this idea of mine, the self-absorbed, my house, my car, my clothes, my new iPhone 73, mine, 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 mine. Can you imagine what that phone will be like? That'd be a crazy phone. This is a problem for many reasons. One of the reasons is this. None of those things that we perceive as mine are permanent. They will all burn away. All of it. 2 Peter chapter 3. But the day of the Lord will come as unexpectedly as a thief, and the heavens will pass away with a terrible noise, and the very elements themselves will disappear in fire, and the earth and everything on it will be found to deserve judgment. Since everything around us is going to be destroyed like this, what holy and godly lives you should live, looking forward to the day of God and hurrying it along. On that day, He will set the heavens on fire, and the elements will melt away in the flames. The house that you really want, it won't always be there. The things of this world, when we pass from this world, we will not be taking them with us. The things that exist in the world today will not be transferred to the new world. So the things that we are entrusted with in this life are simply tools for us to steward to the glory of God. We are entrusted with money and skills and gifts and talents and opportunities in order to use them to bring the kingdom of God from heaven to earth. So when we fall victim to the snares of Satan, to stay in poverty or to oppress the marginalized, instead of using the treasure that we are entrusted with to bring good news to the poor, to provide healing for the broken, freedom for the captive, or justice for the oppressed, then we have made the exact same mistake as the brother who wasted it all on wild living. First, we have the younger brother being consumed with the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life. He's caught up in the trap that so many are caught up in the world today in. And then something unexpected happens. There is a downturn in the economy. Verse 14, about that time his money ran out, and a great famine swept over the land. He began to starve. Oh, can you believe it? A famine happened, an economic downturn happened, a pandemic hit. And there has been, it seems like a dozen economic downturns in my lifetime. I didn't research this. It's probably more. It's not unexpected, is my point. There will always be an economic downturn. It says a great famine swept over the land, and a famine is always on the horizon, even in 2022. Downturns are always coming. Dips and disasters are a certain, guaranteed part of this life. The youngest son in the parable made faulty assumptions, and we should learn from his faulty thinking. First thing he thought his future was secure financially. He thought his money would not run out. He thought his current skill set was enough to get him by. He was out there living like things were always going to be perfect. Sometimes we do this today. Just moving along like there's never going to be a challenge. We're never going to have a hiccup. We're never going to have to take the car into the shop. And sometimes people are just out misliving or misunderstanding what the provision of God is, and they think and they say things like this: God will provide. God will provide. But that doesn't mean your car won't break down. Your car's going to break down. His provision is helping you be prepared for the car when it breaks down. While it is true God provides, it does not mean that we can ignore his provision for 5 years and then complain when we don't have enough for the famine. And be confident of this: the famine is coming. That is why financial planners and financial ministries strongly encourage everybody to have an emergency account and a strategy to handle the financial storms when they come, not if they come. Such as lost jobs, changes in the economy, injuries, disabilities, pandemics, famines, whatever it happens to be. Do you know what? This doesn't just go for individuals. This goes for businesses and churches as well. Do you know that as a church, we have a reserve fund to handle famines and economic downturns? When we first started the church, we didn't have a legitimate reserve fund because we were just getting started. Then one time, about 15 years ago, we had a moment where our accounts were so low that I wouldn't cash my check because I didn't think it would clear. And from that moment on, we were much more intentional about setting aside funds for a reserve account. One of the exciting milestone miracles that we were able to accomplish in 2021 was that at the end of 2021, our church now has a fully funded reserve account. This is a big deal. See, that's so exciting. You should have a fully funded reserve account as well. That would be great. Everybody has a fully funded emergency account. That's a huge win for us as a church and for our future. I want you to learn this from it. God gave us a season of provision, of abundance, and part of proper stewardship is to then plan for the future. Sometimes God's provision is for us to follow his wisdom in times of plenty, to store up for times of need. Look to the ant. Proverbs chapter 6. Take a lesson from the ants, you lazy bones. Learn from their ways and become wise. Though they have no prince or governor or ruler to make them work, they labor hard all summer, gathering food for the winter. But you lazy bones, how long will you sleep? Will you wake up? When you wake up, a little extra sleep, a little more slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, then poverty will pounce on you like a bandit. Scarcity will attack you like an armed robber. It's important to use the surplus of one season to buffer against the needs you will have in another season. This is really an important part of good stewardship. The son, this prodigal son we beat up on a lot because he makes so many stupid decisions. But there is something we should learn from him that's not just the stupid stuff. It said he came to his senses. Proverbs 15 says he persuaded a local farmer to hire him. And the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. Catch this. The young man had to persuade the farmer to give him the lowest paying job on the farm. I mean, the craziness of this is that this wealthy young kid had such limited skills, or his skills were so different than what anybody needed, that he couldn't even get a job that would pay him a living. It was the modern reality that he was facing. He was literally making minimum wage, and it wasn't enough. I'm sure he had some type of skills in his life, but they weren't good enough for the present reality that he was living in. Now, this is a real-time situation in 2022. Maybe you have had some hopes and dreams to pursue a certain career or just something that you like doing. But the world changes so fast around us that it may no longer be possible to make a living doing the thing that you previously wanted to do. And if you are stuck in some type of low-wage job that gives you no purpose, or if you spent a few years out there in wild living and now you're trying to get right, then it's time to come to your senses like the prodigal son. And watch this. This young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. His hunger, his brokenness, his vulnerability caused a stirring within him to get out of his mess. And in verse 17 it says, when he finally came to his senses. Sometimes God uses these difficult seasons and moments in our life to bring us to our senses. He came to his senses because of his brokenness. Now, this wasn't just like he was broke for 5 minutes. It wasn't just like, I don't have enough cash on me today, sorry. He clearly had been wrestling with this reality for a period of time because his amount of money in the bank kept going down. He was wasting his money. He's wasting his money. At some point, he's starting to realize, oh, I'm running out of money. Then he's starting to realize, oh, I can't make any more money. And that didn't bring him to his senses. What brought him to his senses was the complete bottom. I'm sure he had been ignoring his reality until there were only two choices left. And here's the thing that happens in life today as well. You have two choices when you're at the bottom. You can give yourself over entirely to kind of this survival mode, which takes you down a very dark path, or you return to the Father who lived in surplus along with his workers. You change and you return. You humble yourself. You go back to what needs to be done. And in verse 17, he says to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare. And here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. His need brought him to a point of decision. And he came to his senses. Watch what he did. He changed his employer. He changed his career. And he returned to his father. Those are modern day things that oftentimes need to occur. As the worship team comes up, by returning to the Father, the Son does something really important. He identifies that he is no longer going to try to be in charge of his own life. He recognizes that when he led his own life, that all he did was mess it up. He recognizes that if he simply follows what his Father says, that he's going to be just fine. And that, my friends, is the point today. We have a good Father. He has given us all kinds of gifts and talents and treasure. And if we will simply use it as he instructs and provides, we can find ourselves in a different place. His provision comes, but his provision comes through obedience. So, as we said last week, be wise with debt, spend less than you make, have a short-term and long-term plan, protect yourself against setbacks, and give generously. And above all, recognize that wherever you are at today, the Father waits for you to return, no matter how far off you've ever gone. Would you stand with me as we close today? I have homework for you again today. Sorry. There's a website that I want you to look at. And for some of you, I want you to set up an appointment on that. It's called moneycanvas.com. It's a weird end of a service. But moneycanvas.com. If you've said to yourself, I have no idea what to do with money. I don't even know who to ask. And it's too intimidating for some reason to talk to somebody here. Go to moneycanvas.com and set up an appointment, and you can get a free, 100% free Christian financial planner. True story. Behind the scenes for several years, I've been helping to make this happen. And I would love for all of you, if you don't have a financial plan, if you've never kind of worked through this before, call this, set the number up, and they will walk you through. I won't know anything about it. You're not going to be trying to sold any products or anything like that. But it's just a way to jumpstart how to think about your budget, how to think about your spending, how to think about your income. And it would be super, super helpful for a lot of you. And so moneycanvas.com, we'll also post it in social media this week so you can see how to do that as well. A few of you in the church have already gone through this, and it's been super helpful for you. But what we're trying to do here over this series is we're trying to get you to a space where you can do exactly what God wants you to do. And we recognize there are obstacles in the way. So this is just part of the journey of removing some of those obstacles for you. The worship team is going to close us in a song as we close out together. But I'd just like you to reflect today for a few moments as they're singing. Maybe there's a situation you just need to return to God on. God, maybe I've been hiding something from you, or very intentionally not addressing some things. Maybe there's a come to your senses moment that needs to happen. And that's okay. The Father is not going to hold that against you. He wants you to return. So wherever it is, whatever it's at today, I'd encourage you to make those types of steps forward.